When you think of the Beatles, you think of four young men who changed the world of music forever. John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr weren't just bandmates, they were brothers. But behind the fame and success, the relationships between them were often complicated, full of love, rivalry, clashes, and deep tragedy. Now, at 82, Paul McCartney has finally opened up about his lifelong connection with George Harrison, and his words are both heartbreaking and inspiring. Brothers in music, Paul McCartney first met George Harrison as teenagers in Liverpool. Paul was just 15, and George was even younger. Despite his age, George had incredible guitar skills that quickly impressed Paul and John Lennon. By the time the Beatles officially formed, George was the lead guitarist, adding his quiet but powerful touch to their sound. Paul now admits that George was often overlooked in the early years. While John and Paul dominated the spotlight as the band's main songwriters, George quietly waited for his turn. But when he did get his chance, songs like Something and Here Comes the Sun proved that he was just as brilliant as the others. The clashes and conflicts, but success came at a price. The 1960s were full of tension, and George often felt overshadowed by the Lennon-McCartney partnership. Paul has openly admitted that he and George clashed many times in the studio. Paul's perfectionist style often frustrated George, who wanted more freedom to explore his own ideas. One of the most famous conflicts came during the recording of Let It Be. Cameras even caught George snapping at Paul with the now iconic line, "I'll play whatever you want me to play, or I won't play at all, if you don't want me to." Moments like this revealed how strained things had become behind the scenes. Paul reflects on those years with both regret and understanding. He knows his strong personality sometimes pushed George away, but he also remembers how, despite the fights, George remained deeply loyal to the band. The tragedies after the Beatles broke up, George went on to have a successful solo career. His 1970 album All Things Must Pass became a masterpiece, proving his talent to the world. But life wasn't always kind to him. George suffered personal struggles, including battles with fame and health. One of the darkest moments came in 1999 when George survived a terrifying home invasion and stabbing. Later, in 2001, tragedy struck again. George lost his battle with lung cancer at just 58 years old. Paul has said that losing George felt like losing a brother all over again, after already losing John Lennon 2 decades earlier. Paul's final words on George now: at 82, Paul McCartney speaks about George with both pride and sorrow. He remembers George as the little brother of the group, but also as one of the greatest songwriters and guitarists of all time. Paul admits that their fight seems small compared to the love they shared as lifelong friends. In one emotional reflection, Paul revealed how he was able to be with George during his final days. He held George's hand and sat by his side, calling it one of the most emotional experiences of his life. Even in death, their bond was unbreakable. A legacy that lives on today, Paul continues to honor George's memory in his concerts, often playing Something as a tribute. He believes George's music will live forever, inspiring generations to come. For Paul, speaking openly about George after all these years is not just about remembering the past, it's about keeping his friend's spirit alive. At 82, Paul McCartney finally laid bare the truth. Behind the conflicts and tragedies, George Harrison was not just his bandmate, but his brother. And that love, despite everything, will never fade.